The president wants to spy on 200 million Americans without a warrant. Has he read this document, which he was sworn to uphold?
Now, I will not have you libel Abraham Lincoln.
I don't understand the problem with registering guns. We register cars.
Mark Levine brings you the news the government doesn't want you to know.
Today, an explosive story about connections between white supremacists and Islamic terrorists.
When there's a conflict between Scalia's conservative values and the Constitution of the United States, he throws away the Constitution.
When we do have secret prisons, that is not what America's all about.
Let's go to Mark in 5, 4, 3, 2.
Good evening, America. Welcome to the Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Mark Levine. As the government shutdown enters its third week, it appears a solution may just be on the horizon. Senate Republicans and Democrats have completely given up on the House Republicans, whose Tea Party wing engineered this shutdown of government, and they're working together feverishly to come up with some kind of deal. We'll discuss exactly what that deal is or can be later on in the show. They're also talking about finally addressing the budget that the Democrats in the Senate passed 6 months ago. The budget numbers are also on the horizon. But the plot to stop the Affordable Care Act, which the Republicans call Obamacare, appears to not have succeeded. Or will it? Will part of the deal actually help in some way delay, defund, or somehow hit Obama's signature program? And more importantly, in my view, is the question that I think will live on way past this crisis. And that is whether or not a single wing of one party in one house of Congress should be able to force its agenda by threatening a government shutdown or by threatening national default. And if we don't get a deal as early as Thursday, that's right, Thursday, we may just default on the national debt for the first time in American history. It's never happened before, but economists across the spectrum are saying it would be economic Armageddon. To help address these questions, I've invited Perry-Ann Boring. She is a reporter on RT America. She's a self-described libertarian, and she's a former staffer for a Republican member of Congress from Florida. Perry-Ann, welcome to the Inside Scoop.
Great to be here.
So let me address, before we get to the details of what this deal is going to be and the budget negotiations and even the Affordable Care Act, I want to address this prime philosophical question. Is the tactic used by the Tea Party Republicans, threatening to shut down the government, threatening to default on the national debt, if they don't get their way on a law that they don't have the votes to pass, is that a legitimate tactic? Or if they succeed, will this cause other minority parties to do this in the future?
Well, I think this premise that the Tea Party is overthrowing the Republican Party and is a minority rule is completely false to begin with. Leadership is behind this, and just because someone advocates for fiscal discipline, that does not make them a Tea Partier. And detractors calling any Republican who wants to slow down government spending the suicide caucus or suicide bombers or trying to hold the economy hostage is really just ad hominem attacks to what's the real issue.
Are they not threatening, if we don't raise the debt ceiling, to have the United States default on the national debt?
That's absolutely false. The government brings in about $200 billion a month in revenues, and the interest payments are about $20 billion. There's plenty of money to make these payments. As JP Morgan outlined about a week ago, they put a study out that said if the government defaults on the debt, it will be because they chose to, not because they had to.
What is the legal authority for the Treasury to prioritize anything? There's nothing in our Constitution, nothing in the law that I know of that says the Treasury pay off the Chinese nationals before you pay off the people who need Social Security or who need regular government funds. It's just not in the law.
Well, that is an absolute concern, and I do understand that side as well. What I would advocate for is to start streamlining the government before we start making these cuts to the programs that so many people rely on. The GAO put out a great report, the bipartisan watchdogs, of duplication, fragmentation, and overlap within our government. And there's billions of dollars to save within there.
And we can talk about all of that, and I promise you, we will get to the budget. And I know that you're one of the few people out there that actually, I think, supports the government shutdown, or at least supports strangling government.
Well, I don't support shutting
spending.
the shutdown, but there has been 17 shutdowns in the past 35 years. It should not be used regularly, but when we have this amount of massive debt, $17 trillion, I mean, we're really looking at a very serious fiscal situation. I mean, sometimes it takes extreme measures to address extreme problems.
Okay, there's lots of things I want to address there. First of all, you said it's happened 70 times in the past 35 years. It actually has not happened for 18 years. The last time it happened was when Newt Gingrich engineered the government shutdown. And one of the reasons it hasn't happened a lot recently is because the Attorney General of the United States under Jimmy Carter said that if there is no budget agreement, the government can't function. Prior to that, in 1979, that opinion by Attorney General Civiletti, basically the government just kept on going, even though the budget wasn't passed, and the effects of a shutdown, and I put
partial
in quotes,
shutdown,
because it wasn't really
Right.
it wasn't really part of it. It was the Attorney General back in '79. Maybe that order could be overruled by the current Attorney General. I don't know. It's certainly not in the legislation. But you may also know that under Dick Gephardt, there was a rule. They called it the Gephardt rule back in the late 1970s that said, you know what, this whole debt ceiling notion is silly. It didn't exist in the early founding. It didn't exist for 100 years. It didn't exist until World War I. Here's what we're going to do. Anytime Congress votes to spend more than it taxes, automatically the debt ceiling goes up. They called it the Gephardt rule, and we didn't have any of these threats of a government shutdown all the way up till Newt Gingrich in 1995 said, you know what, I'm in charge, I'm bringing back this rule, and I'm going to shut down the government. I support the Gephardt rule, not the Gingrich rule.
Well, I would make 2 points. There's blame to go around on all sides, absolutely. Everybody is playing a part of this foolishness, of this game that Congress and the president is truly playing. We can all see, but the Senate hasn't passed a budget. They finally passed
a
budget
this year. 6 months ago.
But they didn't pass a budget for almost 4 years, and
well, you're complaining about something that happened 4 years ago. I mean, those things we've had the government function. This time, the Senate did pass a budget, and the House refused to take it up. So you can't blame the Senate this time.
You could say the same thing from the other side, that they didn't pass a budget for 4 years.
The difference is the Democrats never threatened to shut the government down. They never threatened to default on the national debt, and that brings us back to the first question, which I asked you. Is this a legitimate tactic? Because I'll tell you this, if you think it is a legitimate tactic, then my party, the Democratic Party, we're going to do it ourselves. I'll tell you the first thing I'm going to do. We're going to say we're going to shut down the government and have economic Armageddon if you won't do background checks for the mentally ill owning AK-47s. I don't think the mentally ill should AK-47s. The vast majority of the American people don't think the mentally ill should AK-47s, but we couldn't pass it through ordinary legislative process. So we'll just threaten economic Armageddon and we'll get our way.
There's no economic Armageddon. The economy is not going to crash unless the administration chooses to default on the debt, and they don't have to do that. They have plenty of revenue to do so. But calling this a shutdown is propaganda. Only 18% of the federal workforce has been furloughed, and the government has been playing all sorts of games, using our military as pawns in this game of using more money, more force to close barricades, close the memorials, close down Mount Rushmore, close down the ocean in Florida.
They're required to by law. That's what it says. That's what, unless you think the Attorney General was wrong back in the Carter days, that said that when the government is shut down, it can't spend money on non-essential things.
But they're spending more money to close down the monuments and just leave them open.
It costs less money to stick a barrier in. You're allowed. Here's what Civiletti wrote in his memo. He said you're allowed to turn out the lights and lock the doors. And that's it.
But they're not.
And that's what putting a barrier does. It's the equivalent of turning out the lights.
These are public spaces. All they had to do was just
people can
leave
go
them
around
alone.
the barriers.
They could have just left them alone. They spent all this time, all this money setting the barricades up. The veterans, they had the Million Veteran March yesterday. They came, took the barricades down, threw them in front of the White House, told Obama to leave office, and they put them back. They're spending more money, more time, more government resources to keep barricading the memorials up.
I don't know why the barricade's a big deal. They shut up. Look, people can break into government offices and unlock the doors and do that as well. But if they're injured or something, it shouldn't be the government's fault.
The park police was there, and they were saluting the veterans to what they were doing. They even supported this.
I am fine with saluting veterans, but maybe you don't think any of our memorials should be staffed. Maybe you don't think we don't need the park police. You'd probably be one to end the park police, right? Let people roam through the national parks and don't worry about safety and don't worry about rules and don't worry about keeping out campfires or anything like that, because basically pure anarchy should rule at any time, right?
Absolutely not. No, there's definitely a place for government. I don't think we need anarchy, but I think what's been
Should we not close the national parks?
I think what has been so interesting, I think they should be...
Are they essential government business, the national parks and the memorials? I don't think they're essential. I mean, I like them.
They're using more time and resources to close them.
No, they're not. There's no one working there. They put a barrier there.
The park police is still there. I've been down there every day.
For security, they are there, and that part is essential. Security is essential. Ordinary operation is not essential. That's what the law is.
So why do they put the barricades? They don't need to put the barricades.
They put the barricades there because they turn the fountains off. There are dangerous things.
Park police was present when the Lincoln Memorial was painted. They had some lady threw paint all over the Lincoln. The park police was there, and they weren't able to stop her. Yet during the government shutdown, they allowed thousands of veterans to come in and remove
Maybe we should have
barricades.
more park police there to prevent people from throwing paint on the Lincoln Memorial. The heart of my issue, though, is you think it's perfectly fair, just, and normal. If I don't like something, let's say I want, I don't know,
No, it's not
I want a
normal.
statue named after me in Tennessee, in my hometown. And if I don't get it, I'm going to shut the government down. And so basically, every day we can threaten to shut the government down. We can threaten to fall on the national
No one's
debt.
calling that.
And if it's no big deal,
$17 trillion in debt.
so you are fine with threatening to shut the government down and threatening to default the national debt if I can't get a law passed. Let's talk about Affordable Care Act.
This should not be for a regular tactic that people use, but during extreme times,
okay, let's talk about the Affordable
it causes
Care Act.
for extreme
because
measures.
the Republicans didn't shut down the government over the budget. The budget wasn't even part of it. What they did is there was a law passed, the Affordable Care Act, which you folks like to call Obamacare.
President Obama calls it Obamacare.
He does now. So fine, we can call it Obamacare.
We can call it the Affordable Care Act.
It doesn't matter. The law was passed. It was passed. It took more than a year to pass it.
On a party line vote.
It took 60 votes to get passed. The Senate, the
with
filibuster.
no Republican ideas in it at all.
That's not true at all. There were lots of Republican ideas.
Well,
there were several hundred amendments accepted. Republicans put forward amendments. The Democrats accepted it, and the Republicans didn't vote for it.
The main things Republicans called for, selling across state lines, that never made it.
It would have if the Republicans had been willing to negotiate, but they weren't. But let's get back to the topic.
But now who's not willing to negotiate?
topic.
Funny thing about that.
Well, they weren't. So here we have this law. It's on the books. The Republicans don't like it. It's got nothing to do with the budget.
The American people don't like it.
Okay, actually, the American people do like it, and they're increasingly liking it. But we'll get to that in a second.
How are the exchanges working for you?
Well, they haven't
people.
been set up yet. They've got 3 months. The heart of the issue is if you don't like a law, the Republicans really don't like this law. They don't have the votes to overturn it. They don't have the votes to repeal it. They're not even close. In fact, Ted Cruz, let me play for you what Senator Ted Cruz. So you know what? We're going to a break. When we come back from break, I'm going to play for you what Ted Cruz said about the Affordable Care Act. Basically, what he said is, once this thing goes into place, people are going to like it like sugar. They're going to be addicted to it. We've got to stop it now because we won't be able to stop it later. So he comes on and he says this. We're going to play that when we come back. The heart of the issue is, though, is that this tactic is something you think is justified. Because if you think it's a justified tactic, you know that the green wing of the Democratic Party might just do the same thing next year. And you'd be okay with that? You can quickly respond. We got about 30 seconds.
There is definitely ideologues on both sides of the aisle here, and there are definitely people on the left who just want to spend to oblivion, and that is not something that should...
And they could say that we're going to shut down the government and not pay the national debt if we don't spend to oblivion, in your words, and that would be a legitimate tactic because the Tea Party tried it first. That's my concern.
All right, good luck with that.
My concern is the tactic. Folks, if you want to call in and join this discussion, you can do so. That's one of the benefits of being on live TV. Just give us a call, 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275, local number 571-749-1166. We'll be right back with my lively discussion with Perry Embori right after this.
Saving for retirement might be easy for some folk, but for others, it might take a little more work. And for those who haven't started, there are still things you can do to catch up.
Oh, that is good news.
Like getting out from underneath past debt. And don't get wrapped up with high-interest credit cards.
Get you some eyes.
Be diversified with your investments. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Your financial goals are not out of reach. The choice is clear. For a happy ending, choose to save.
Everyone with alcohol and drug addiction is in the same boat. With treatment, you can find solid ground. For drug and alcohol information and treatment referral for you or someone you know, call 1-800-662-HELP.
Dude, are you sure you want this tattoo? Because just do it.
Some mistakes in life are permanent. Like hearing loss. To learn how to protect your hearing, visit asha.org.
You've probably heard about heart disease, but did you know that it's the #1 killer of women nationwide? Heart disease claims more lives each year than breast cancer, lung cancer, or strokes combined. But there are steps you can take to protect yourself against it. For more information on how you can prevent heart disease, contact your local American Heart Association or visit their website at www.americanheart.com.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. I am your host, Mark Levine, having a feisty discussion with my guest, Perianne Boring, a self-described libertarian, former staffer for a Republican in Congress from Florida, and also a reporter at RT America. So Perianne, there's a lot of different issues that we raised, and I want to take them apart piece by piece. First, though, I want to play, as promised, this is Ted Cruz. Now, he's on Sean Hannity's radio show, so all we have is the audio. Okay. But I want you to hear what he has to say, because I think it's really instructive about why we're in this mess to begin with.
If we don't do it now, in all likelihood, Obamacare will never, ever be repealed. Why is that? Because on January 1st, the exchanges kick in, the subsidies kick in, and the Obama administration has, by the way, eliminated the eligibility requirements. There's no checking on it, which means it's basically setting up liar loans. Their plan is to get the American people addicted to the sugar, addicted to the subsidies, and once that happens, in all likelihood,
it's over. Never gets repealed.
So we either do it now or we surrender entirely. But the second point, which is so frustrating, but right now, in all candor, we do not have the votes to do this. We don't have the votes in the Senate. We don't have the votes in the House. And to be honest, we're not close right now.
So there's Ted Cruz saying, we don't have the votes to do this through the Constitution, where we both houses vote. We don't have the votes to repeal it in a normal fashion. And once it happens, Americans get addicted to the sugar. And as Sean Hannity said, this thing never gets repealed. So we have to use extraordinary measures to stop this from going into effect, because it's law, because Americans are going to love it, and we got to stop it now, and we don't have the votes. The only way to stop it is to threaten to shut down the government, to threaten to default on the national debt. I want to know your thoughts on what Ted Cruz had to say.
I think we're kind of taking that out of context just a little bit. I didn't get to see the whole interview, so I'm not sure what they were saying before that. But what it sounds like to me is that he's saying, like other welfare programs, people get caught in the chain of poverty where they're relying on the government to take care of them, and then they don't know how to care for themselves. And then for generations, they're stuck on welfare, and they're stuck on the dole, and they never get to learn about being able to take care of themselves and providing for themselves and providing for their families and having that self-worth. And I think that's what's really important.
Would you consider Social Security to be a welfare program?
It's a maybe. I mean, it's a retirement.
Well, I mean,
program.
do you think that all those 80-year-olds on the dole, on that Social Security dole, I mean, they really should be working, and all those?
Well, Social Security is kind of a different product because people spend their lives paying into it. So by the time they reach Social Security,
how about Medicare? The same thing, right? People spend their lives paying in. Okay. Well, this is the program that provides health insurance for everyone. What about Medicaid? That's something that provides health insurance to the poor. Are you against Medicaid?
I think that when we have these massive programs where we're just supplying benefits to people who can't provide for themselves, we should offer them an outlet so they can work out of it, so they aren't always on the government.
Like workfare. That's what Bill Clinton proposed back in the 90s.
Right, and then this is this is exactly the argument we had last year with unemployment when Obama, by executive order, removed the working requirements under unemployment. And the reason why we had
didn't remove the working requirements. He allowed working or studying or working toward a job. There's still requirements in the law.
But they were relaxed. But the reason why we had them was because studies had showed that when you have these type of requirements, it encourages people to provide for themselves and to not be relied on by the government.
So Perianne, would you say that the 30 million Americans without health insurance, they're all lazy bums? The ones who work at Walmart, for example.
No, I don't think that.
They should get a better job, one that pays more. Maybe they should become a Wall Street banker. I don't know, because they certainly.
No,
pay
I think
very
it's
well.
unfortunate that so many people are in a situation where we don't have the market for them to have affordable coverage.
Because they can't afford it.
But the problem that I have with Obamacare is that it puts so many more people on Medicaid, but it doesn't add any doctors. So we might have more people that have access to health insurance, but what are we doing to make sure that care is going to be provided for.
So you're worried that if all the poor get health care too, maybe the super rich won't get care? Is that the concern? There won't be enough doctors to take care of everybody?
There's not going to be enough
That's your
doctors.
concern?
We do have a doctor shortage right now in the primary care industry. There's not enough primary care doctors to go around. We don't have enough medical students. There's a huge shortage within GME. There's not enough residency positions for students that are
So we should only take care of the
graduating.
rich, because if the poor use the doctors too, there just won't be enough doctors.
No, I just think when the government comes in and tries to take over the entire healthcare market,
Take over?
that there's not going to be there's going to be imbalances.
How do you, I know that website doesn't work that great. I admit it, healthcare.gov. But I've been there, and I did get it to work yesterday. And when they finally got to my plans that it proposed to me, there wasn't a single public option there. Blue Cross had an option, and Kaiser had an option. I had like 32 options, but none of them were government options.
Right, well, it looks good
So
now.
why do you call that a takeover?
Well, it looks good now because it changes the relationship between people and their doctors. So now the government
How does it change
is
the
going
relationship?
to be in between.
All the government did is allow me to buy cheap healthcare insurance.
Right, but now the
Good for me.
the IRS is getting involved with it. So one thing that a lot of conservatives are concerned with the IRS scandal is that people are going to say, oh, if we do in fact have a doctor's shortage, which is very possible, people are going to say, oh, well, you're a conservative, we're going to discriminate you. You're going to go at the back of the line. I mean, these are concerns that people have.
These are conspiracy theories. These are wild, reckless conspiracy
these
theories.
are the issues
You just
that
said a
we
government
see.
takeover. Now you know, because you're a smart person, this is not a government takeover. That's a talking point.
Well, the government
to say
is
the government is
absolutely-
providing health insurance exchanges whereby you can buy private insurance at a cheaper price, and you get a choice of 32 different private companies. That's not a public takeover. I support a public takeover.
More and more doctors are not accepting Medicaid patients.
They don't have to.
anymore. They don't have to. But the problem is, if we put all these more people on Medicaid, and then we have doctors that aren't accepting Medicaid patients, all these people are going to get to their healthcare providers, and they're going to have long lines. And this is the problems that we have in Canada. This is the problem we have in the UK, where we have similar type government
Canadians love their
problems.
health care.
Canadians have long
English
lines.
people love their health
English
care.
people have bad teeth
You know
because
what?
they
I'll
can't
tell you
see the
something.
doctor.
I would rather wait in line a week to see a doctor than have no doctor at all. And
Well, you know what they tell you in
30 million
Canada?
Americans have no, actually more, 50 million Americans have no doctor at all. And you don't seem to show any compassion for these people that
No,
are working
it's
hard,
not that
playing
I
by the
don't have
rules,
there's
and
so
can't
many-
afford health care.
No, I want everyone to have access to health care, but I think
How? They don't have the money, Perianne.
when the government comes in and adds all these people onto the exchanges, but doesn't add any doctors, I mean, there's just imbalances within the system. There's
The
problems with
doctors
Obamacare.
will get paid with every patient they see.
Doctors aren't
the
getting
doctors
paid now.
have an incentive.
Doctors are not getting paid now.
Our healthcare costs are through the roof. They're 1/6 of the nation's economy. That used to be 4% of our GDP. They're now 16% of our
Doctors
GDP.
are
American
dropping-
doctors are paid better than any doctors anywhere in the world.
Not by the government. Not by the government.
Why do they
Doctors-
take Medicare patients then? Why do doctors take Medicare patients?
Well, in a lot of areas, like in Florida, where I'm from, there's so many seniors.
That's right.
So if they don't take Medicaid patients, they're not going to get anybody because everyone's on Medicaid.
They're going to
because
get people
everyone's-
who aren't on Medicare and on Medicaid. You know what? They take Medicare patients because even though they're paid less than through the private health insurance system, they're still paid a decent enough amount that the vast majority of doctors do take Medicare patients. The vast majority of doctors do take Medicaid patients. And if they don't want to, they don't have to.
And I hope and pray that this is sustainable, but we're seeing more and more doctors not accept Medicaid patients. And we're seeing more private doctors come forward with private practices where people are even paying cash for their services.
And that's fine. That's fine. That's the free market. And the government, so-called government takeover, doesn't prevent any of that, does it? That can still happen.
Well, I definitely have a concern with the future of the healthcare of our country.
So
and
why-
as a young person, I definitely is in my best interest to make sure that we have great healthcare.
So why not let's see how it works? All right, we've got the exchanges. They're opened up. The website's overloaded. More than 10 million people tried to get on it. That's why it crashed. But they got 3 months
Well, that's what
to see if it
the
works.
president said, but their IT officials have said that some of the issues that they're having aren't necessarily because of volume. They're more
That's
because
true.
they were.
That's
they
true.
were
The rollout
rushed.
was not very successful. But you know what? The rollout of Social Security wasn't very successful either. It takes time to get these things right. Why not wait a couple years, see how this thing rolls out, and then if the American people don't like it, they can use their elected representatives to repeal it. The reason why I don't think that's going to occur is actually, and I hate to say this because it almost never happens, I agree with Ted Cruz. I agree with Senator Ted Cruz when he says Americans, this is how I read what he says, Americans are going to like the Affordable Care Act so much, they're not going to want to repeal it, and they don't have the votes now.
Well, when you have the safety blanket on top of you, instead of having a safety net, what so many people advocate for, when you have the safety blanket that suffocates people, they can't see other options. So people are going to get stuck in this government system that they're not going to understand that there's other options out there because it's all that they're going to know. And that's the issue. And if we go a couple years and we have the Affordable Care Act and we let it roll out and then it's not successful, the next step, what conservatives are afraid of, is that the next step is going to be a single payer system,
which I support,
even farther
and you don't.
in the wrong
but here's
direction.
the thing. So you and I have a disagreement. We have a basically philosophical disagreement over when the government should come in and help people and when people should be left on their own. It's a philosophical agreement you and I will probably always have, given our political views. That's fair. That's America. That's why I brought you on the show to discuss this. Here's my point that goes beyond the philosophy. When there's a philosophical disagreement, isn't the right way to resolve it in a democracy, or to be specific in a constitutional republic, that you vote for people who agree with you, I vote for people who agree with me, that we send them to Congress and the majority votes, and you get a majority in the House, a majority in the Senate, you even get past the filibuster, which I hate, but we can save that argument for another day. The president signs it into law, and we're done. And if you don't like it, you get enough people on your side to pass a law in the House and get a new president in the Senate, and then you overturn it by the Constitution.
Well, that is how it is set up. But also what's set up is the appropriations process. And the Constitution also says that all revenue spending bills have to originate in the House of Representatives.
So here's my question.
So the House...
Every other fight, every 17 fights that you've mentioned, the government shutdown, they've all been about the budget. They've all been about appropriations. They've all been about how much revenue should go to which place, or the overall level of revenue, level of tax, and so forth. This is the first time that I'm aware of, maybe you're aware of another one, in American history where they tied this other thing, this law that was already passed, to it. And what I'm saying is, if this tactic is allowed to succeed, my side can use it too, and I'm starting with gun control because that's something I firmly believe in.
I mean, the Affordable Care Act is several $1 trillion. I mean, this is a pretty big percentage of our entire economy.
Okay, but you lost.
I mean,
but you lost. The American people re-elected President Obama
because they had Romney, who was a terrible representative.
Sorry.
He had Romney care hanging around his neck the whole time. I mean, he was not.
Then you should have voted for Newt Gingrich in the primaries. The point is,
I didn't vote for Romney.
Fair enough, and you don't have to. My point is, we have a political system. You know,
and
President Obama isn't my first choice either.
The political system also says that the House is responsible for bringing up appropriations bills. The House is not under any constitutional authority to fund Obamacare. It was passed, but now because of the appropriations
So you think it's a
process.
legitimate tactic to say, we don't like Obamacare, and we're going to threaten to shut down the government and even default on the national debt if you don't give us what we want?
No one is advocating for that. No one is advocating that.
Well, isn't that what they did?
That is not what they did. They're not saying we're going to default on the debt. No one is going to default on the debt. That's not going to happen. That's just a scare tactic.
Well, let's talk. So let's separate the two.
Propaganda at its best.
Let's separate the two. All right. You think it is fair to have the government shut down so as not to fund Affordable Care Act. You don't think it'd be fair to do a default on the national debt.
I think it is a noble cause because the business community is very concerned about this bill. They're very concerned about the Affordable Care Act, that it's going to have a negative effect on the economy and jobs. And you know what the number one thing people around the world, as polled by Gallup once, is a job. That's above healthcare, that's above food, that's above shelter.
But you're not answering my question about this tactic.
I think it is a noble cause. I think it is a noble cause. And I think
it is worthwhile to threaten to shut down the government for this noble cause.
I don't think we need to keep the government shut down, but when there's extreme measures that it causes for extreme...
Okay, so you're willing to shut down the government. What about default on the national debt?
We are not going to default on the national debt. Not going to default on the national debt.
All right. And I want to talk about what that means, because it might happen on Thursday.
I think a lot of people don't.
It might happen on Thursday. Folks, if you want to call in and join this fierce debate, I encourage you to do so. 888-488-MARK.
I need a job.
Necesito trabajo.
I would like to speak English better.
Me gustaría hablar inglés mejor.
I want to be a U.S. citizen.
Quisiera ser ciudadano de los Estados Unidos.
For over 35 years,
por más de 35 años,
the Hispanic Committee of Virginia has been serving our community.
El Comité Hispano de Virginia ha estado sirviendo a nuestra comunidad.
Job training and placement,
capacitación, ayuda para conseguir trabajo,
education for children and adults,
educación para niños y adultos,
immigration, naturalization, and medical referrals,
ayuda para los procesos de inmigración y naturalización y orientación sobre médicos
are a small part of what we do.
Son solo una pequeña parte de lo que hacemos.
For help, information, or to volunteer,
para ayuda, información o para ofrecerse como voluntario,
contact the Hispanic Committee of Virginia,
comuníquese con el Comité Hispano de Virginia,
helping everyone participate more fully in American society.
ayudando a todos a participar plenamente en la sociedad norteamericana.
Hey, Lena, where's yours?
Would you notice if you were missing half your kidney function? According to the National Kidney Foundation, 20 million people have chronic kidney disease, and 20 million more may be at risk and not even know it. Anyone with high blood pressure, diabetes, or family history of chronic kidney disease is at risk. Early diagnosis is vitally important. To get the whole story, talk to your doctor and visit the National Kidney Foundation at kidney.org or call for a free brochure. Because when it comes to chronic kidney disease, you might not know.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. My name is Mark Levine. My guest is Perry Boring, self-described libertarian, reporter for RT. If you want to join this feisty debate, you can do so. Just call in at 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275. So Perry, I think I established, it's like pulling teeth, but I think I established before the break that you do think it's a legitimate tactic what the House Republicans did to say, we're not going to fund the government at all, we're not going to do a continuing resolution unless you give us a compromise on the Affordable Care Act. You think that's a legitimate tactic that they can use, and frankly, any future Congress can use on any tactic?
I don't like that the government shut down. I want the government to reopen. I think there's so much foolishness behind this. There's so much party line politics behind this. But when there is an issue that anybody on any side of the aisle is willing to fight for, okay, but when we're under extreme circumstances, it causes for extreme measures. But okay, I do want the government to reopen.
All right, so now the next thing, you said, however, nobody's going to default in the national debt. It sounds to me like you do not think that tying a debt ceiling to non-budget legislation, that's going too far.
But that is not raising the debt ceiling does not mean we're going to default on the debt. Raising the debt ceiling says we're not going to borrow anymore.
Right.
Right. So it means we would have to start using our cash on hand, our taxes, instead of going to the Federal Reserve and asking for loans to pay for our bills.
So Congress passes a law that says we're going to tax $1 trillion, and they pass another law that says we're going to spend $1.4 trillion. Okay, so I'm just throwing out random numbers, but the point is, Congress passes a law, we're going to tax this much, and Congress passes a law saying we're going to spend this much. Both are authorized by law. This deficit that Congress wants to pass is completely authorized by law. Whether or not we pay that debt, it seems to me, shouldn't even be up for discussion. I think that actually the debt ceiling is unconstitutional, and I'm going to tell you why. The 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution says, and this is Section 4, one of my favorite provisions, though it's never been invoked. It says, the validity of the public debt of the United States, authorized by law, shall not be questioned. Now, this has never been cited by a single president. In fact, President Obama declined to cite it. I think he's wrong, because it seems to me that the taxes were authorized by law, the spending was authorized by law, and the debt ceiling is actually contradictory legislation. And there are all kinds of provisions about Congress passing contradictory legislation. Someone has to sort it out.
We have to talk about the elephant in the room. And what is the most unconstitutional agency of the government is the Federal Reserve. Without the Federal Reserve, we would not have this amount of debt and deficits. The Federal Reserve is funding this out-of-control spending that we have.
Because the people's representatives in Congress created the Federal Reserve.
And Congress signed monetary policy over to the pseudo-government agency, which was not constitutional at all. And it's completely, I mean, if you go to Article 1, Section 8, all debts must be paid in gold and silver, and all debts are appropriated by Congress, not by some pseudo-federal agency.
Well, to be fair, the Federal Reserve is acting under the authority of Congress.
Right, but Congress
set up
signed
the
it
Federal
over.
Reserve.
They signed it over. But the founding fathers never meant for a central bank. They never meant for a central bank.
Well, actually, there was a big fight over a central bank.
Right.
As you know, for the first, 50 years of American history, Andrew Jackson was fighting the Federalists over it. So we had a national bank, and we didn't have a national bank. But it wasn't decided in the Constitution.
What I was going to get to is taxes.
It was decided by the elected representatives
What I
of
was
the
going to
American
get to
people.
is tax. You're saying, well, we can just raise taxes and pay, but that's not true. We're not going to raise taxes because that's not politically popular. What we're going to do is we're going to print the money. And that's why Obama just nominated Janet Yellen, because she's a fiscal dove. She's going to keep printing that money for Obama to keep spending all the money that he wants. But the thing is that they're just piling all that debt on me and the children I'm going to have and my grandchildren. No one can pay this back. And don't you realize that debt amounts to slavery? We are all going to be chained to this debt. There's a $53,000 per citizen in debt. How are we going to pay this back, Mark?
You and I
can you pay $53,000 in taxes to pay for our debt?
Actually, we have less debt now than we had during World War II, and we had more than our GDP. And you know what? We paid it all back. But here's the thing:
how are we going to pay this back, Mark?
How are having a philosophical discussion over the debt, and we can do that. My point, though, is a more general one. You don't like the Federal Reserve. You don't like how much is being taxed. You don't like the deficit. The answer, it seems, is simple. Find enough people that agree. I don't agree with you, so I'm not going to vote for the same candidates you're going to vote for. You find enough candidates that agree with you. You win an election, and in our democracy, that's how decisions are made. You may persuade people on TV to agree with you, and then they vote for candidates you like, and that's how decisions are made. What you don't get to do is say, I disagree with you, therefore I'm in charge.
No, it's not okay to rack up debts and deficits on the backs of our children and our grandchildren. Give the bill to them. I mean, the road to righteousness is very narrow, and there's very few people that ever walk a straight path. There's a lot of people who do things that are wrong. And
the debt is not righteous?
No, it's not. And spending this amount of money is completely immoral.
Well, first
of
all, we have the deficit just under President Obama. We went from 1.4 trillion to about 700
But
billion.
our debt to GDP ratio, the
billion.
deficit is down, but our debt to GDP ratio is rising.
Under 100%.
Is that about
over 100% in World War II?
It's about 105%. When Obama was born, it was at 66%. Now it's at about 105, and if we include our off-sheet liabilities, it's about 500%.
I have an easy answer that could solve all of the debt crisis and put us back into the surplus that we had under Bill Clinton. You want to hear what it is? It's very simple.
More money?
No, end the Bush tax cuts. You end the Bush tax cuts, and we are in massive surplus.
But as I say, that's not going to happen because it's not politically popular. So what are we going to do? We're going to print the money.
What you propose isn't politically popular either. You're saying shut down the printing presses, don't print the money. What I'm telling you is even less popular than repealing the Bush tax cuts is your idea of suddenly ending the Federal Reserve and going back to the gold standard. That is not very popular.
I'm not advocating for a gold standard, but you know what is the most regressive thing on poor people, on people
Social Security taxes.
No, inflation. Your cost of living, your cost of
What was the inflation rate last year? 1% or was it 2%?
How much did milk go up last year?
Or was it 2%?
How much did milk go up last year?
No, we have milk subsidies.
300%.
And you know what I'm opposed to? Agricultural subsidies, and I bet you are too.
I'm not for subsidies.
Do we agree on that?
No, I'm absolutely
That's why the milk
not
prices
for
are up.
subsidy.
Because of agricultural subsidies, which you and I both
What about
oppose.
gas? I mean, food in
what
general.
What about gas?
Electric.
There's a problem in the Middle East. Maybe you haven't heard about it, but it's aflamed, and they have a lot of our oil. And I and President Obama seek getting away from fossil fuels, supporting things like solar energy, green energy, and battery-powered cars, so we don't have to worry about gas prices. So there's milk prices and there's gas prices. But overall levels of prices are 1% to 2%. What about food? I'll tell you something about food. I support food stamps. I think that hungry people should have a right to eat in America. Here's the thing.
People should have a right to eat, and if their money had purchasing power, they'd be able to afford it without having the government support them.
It's not inflation that's killing the poor and middle class in America.
Not quite,
I'm
but it's
sorry.
sneaking its way
not
in.
Even
it's
close.
sneaking its way in.
What's killing American poor and middle class people is low wages. How about if we raise
purchasing power? What do you think purchasing power is?
Okay, here's the answer. Raise the minimum wage. Let's raise the minimum wage. Let's raise it up to $11, $12, $13.
Why not 20%? Why set it at anything?
Well, I think $12 or $13 just to keep up with what it was from the 1970s.
Why $12 or $13?
So that I'll tell you why. So someone
because the dollar has
decreased
98% since the Federal Reserve's inception in 1913. We wouldn't need a minimum wage if we didn't have all the
since Bill Clinton was president, it's only decreased maybe 10, 20%. Inflation has been low since in the last 20 years.
And they've changed the way they measure inflation 20 times in the past 40 years.
Here's the issue, Perianne.
They keep changing.
I support raising the minimum wage because I think someone who works 40 hours a week, works as hard as they can, works a full week, should be able to support a family at the poverty level and get health care
And they should.
shelter.
I absolutely agree.
Okay, so you and I agree on that.
absolutely
So the
agree.
question is, how do we get there? And your view is by stopping inflation going from 2%, which is what it is now, to 0%. And I'm telling you that's tiny compared
Plus 2%
to the fact
as measured by this random basket of goods. That
you want to call it 3%. I'm not going to fight with you.
I would
what
say
I'm going
it's
to tell
more.
you though,
I
is
would
that
say
wages
it's
have
much
decreased
higher.
more than a third. Real wages, all right, after inflation, are decreasing. And they're not decreasing because of inflation. They're mostly decreasing because employers are taking all the money they make from workers in Mexico and China and people who are willing to work for $1 a day, and they're selling their goods. And if we were to have better wages here at home, if we were to require places like Walmart to actually pay their workers a decent salary, then workers would have enough money to be able to live on those
I will
poverty
strike
wages.
a deal with you. I will strike
All right,
a deal
I'm listening.
with you.
I'm listening.
You quit the printing press, and then we can talk about.
Oh, I do something and then we can talk? No, that's not how it works.
It'll be at a mutual time. You and the Fed, and I'll sign a.
I don't understand why the Federal Reserve offends you so much. It's simply doing what the American people have asked us to do, which is to allow us to have credit. And, you know, credit is something that helps the economy. I mean, when people can borrow money to start a new business, they don't have the capital, borrow the money to buy a home, borrow the money to buy a car.
We have $17 trillion in debt. That's $53,000 per citizen.
So let's raise taxes on rich people. How about this? We'll stop giving special benefits to hedge fund owners. We'll stop giving special benefits to people who own corporate jets.
These people that you've elected in Congress, are they going to vote for that? No one's voting
the Democrats
for this.
have and will and do. We don't have enough Democrats.
They can't pass it.
Well, they could if we elected more Democrats to Congress.
There's not enough people that want to raise taxes. It's not going to happen. So they're going to go to the printing press.
Raising taxes on hedge fund owners, 80% support that. Even a lot of Republicans. Raising taxes on corporate jet owners.
That's not going to pay. You're not going to bring in $17 trillion. If you tax the 1% at 100%, you're not going to bring in enough money to pay off this debt. It's too much.
You would. I'll tell you why. Under Bill Clinton, late 1990s, we, under Democratic proposals, were running a surplus. And that's a word that you don't even hear in Washington. People don't even know what it means. A surplus.
We haven't passed a budget
we had a
in 4 years.
$200 billion surplus in 2000.
And Clinton was signing budgets because
president.
Democrats were passing budgets.
Right.
Something you've just completely written off.
The Democratic Party are the party of the fiscal conservatives. It is your party, the Republican Party, that is spending like drunken sailors.
On what?
Look at the fact that when Bill Clinton was president in 2000, same Congress, we ran a surplus. George Bush becomes president, and lo and behold, he gives
I'm not going to sit here and say.
deficits.
I'm not going to sit here and back up President Bush.
You can't.
I'm not.
That's because
not what I'm saying.
I know you can't
at
do
all.
it.
But today we are in a situation where we have $17 trillion debt. We have no way to pay this back.
What do you mean we have no way to pay it back?
We have to quit raising the debt ceiling. Why even call it a debt ceiling? Just call it the debt target, because it seems like as soon as we raise it, all we want to do is hit it as fast as possible.
Unconstitutional because the 14th Amendment says if you've got a debt authorized by law, it's valid.
But that was before the Federal Reserve was in existence, before the Federal Reserve was printing $85 billion a month. I mean, it's absolutely unsustainable what we're doing here.
But you know what?
And for anyone who doesn't...
Perry Ann, we're sustaining it. The Chinese are lending us $1 trillion. I forget how many $1 trillion or so.
But they're not buying as much as they used to.
Well, they're not.
At all.
You know why?
And they're beginning to laugh in our face.
Because they're afraid that people like the Republican Party are going to fall in the national debt. That's the only thing that would cause us to do this.
passed a memo throughout Congress saying they know we're not going to default on the debt. This is a scare tactic. This is propaganda. This is hysterics.
Well, then what are you complaining about? If we're not going to default on the debt, we can pay back the $17 trillion. We'll just pay it back year by year the way we've been doing it for the last 100 years or so.
Because we have an overbloated government. Back to the GAO report of duplication, overlap, and fragmentation. We need to streamline the government. President Obama said himself that there's not an agency or department that can't be
streamlining the government.
The government is so big, it literally doesn't even know how big it is.
We got to take one more break. But when we come back, I want to know exactly from you what is worthwhile, what government programs we should keep, and which ones we should discard. I'm all for cutting waste and abuse. That's easy to say, but put the pedal to the metal. Exactly where would you cut? Folks, last chance to call in if you want to join us. It's 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275. You can take on Perry Ann or me, or both of us. Back after this.
I helped turn my child's public school into a whole new kind of school. One with a curriculum that really motivates kids. One that has extended hours, 6 days a week, year-round. with loads of academic, cultural, and recreational activities. One that has support services like medical and dental right there. A school where parents' involvement is encouraged, where teachers have more time to teach, and students are excited about learning. There's just one problem. My child doesn't ever want to come home. You can help turn your school into a community school for excellence. Find out how. Call 1-877-LOVE-TO-LEARN.
It's coming. Right to your neighborhood. And when it does, you may be surprised. It's your Social Security statement of your benefits, and it's going to help you plan your financial future. Your benefit statement will tell you how much Social Security you're eligible to receive and when you'll get it. Then you'll know how much you need to save for retirement, because that's coming too. The future is in your hands. Choose to save.
The toxic fumes from this meth lab are seeping into Jamie's sinus cavity. Ammonia vapors invade her throat. Toxic gases fill her lungs. Jamie's body is deteriorating. And she doesn't even know it.
Jamie, dinner.
So, who has the drug problem now? Find out how meth affects you at drugfree.org/.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Back to the Inside Scoop. This is Mark Levine, your host. I'm discussing the issues of the day, specifically the government shutdown with Perianne Boring. She's a reporter at RT America and a self-proclaimed libertarian. We're having a fierce discussion on philosophy, but also on practicality. And one of the things I find interesting is you do think it was a fair tactic that the House Republicans are using, and I would argue that the Tea Party is wagging the tail of the dog. And the reason I would argue that is quite simple. If the House had a vote today on a continuing resolution, it would pass.
But who's not bringing that up? The Speaker.
Speaker of the House.
Who is not
John
part of the
Boehner.
Tea Party. He's not part of the Tea Party.
In fact, I think Speaker Boehner was against it from the beginning. But apparently he's so afraid that he won't be reelected by his caucus come January 3rd,
Only 4 people voted
2015.
against him last year. I don't think he's that scared.
Well,
he has a strong backing.
He apparently, all reports are that he told his people in private this is a really bad idea, but they rolled him.
He's doing it. He's doing it.
I think he's a speaker in name only. They call him a sino. And I think he's basically allowing the Tea Party. But whatever it is, if this is a legitimate tactic, you would have to concede that if the Democrats want something, and we could talk about gun control, we could talk about immigration reform, we could talk about, there are a lot of things Democrats would like to see that haven't passed.
Healthcare is a significant portion of our economy. Huge percentage.
Immigration is a significant portion of our economy. We want immigration reform. We Democrats want it. We haven't been able to get it through Congress. Very simple. We're going to default on the national debt unless you give us immigration reform.
If you want to talk about partisan politics, the Obama administration allowed for an illegal immigration rally to happen on the National Mall on October 8th. At the same time, he closed the World War II memorial that was built with mostly private funds to honor our most beloved war heroes, the World War II veterans. So he would allow illegal.
Actually, the veterans were allowed in because of their free speech rights. For the same reason
that was
others,
way after
but same reason others are allowed in for free speech rights. But get to my point here. If this tactic is justified, and if it succeeds, it's an open door to every faction in Congress. I don't care what their issue is. It could be the farmers who want agricultural subsidies. It could be, like I said, immigration reform. It could be gun control.
The cause is because the business community is calling them to do so.
Well, actually, no. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce came out very strongly against this tactic just last week because they said shutting down the government goes too far. They don't like the Affordable Care Act,
there are plenty
but they
of people in the
said
business
shutting down the government goes too far.
afraid of this
But address this question. You have to admit that if it's a legitimate tactic for your causes, it's also a legitimate tactic for my causes.
It is a huge amount of the economy. I mean, I wish I had the number. What percentage of healthcare makes up our
1/6 of the nation's economy is healthcare.
Okay, what is immigration?
I don't have
not
those
that
numbers.
It's
the work done by undocumented immigrants is quite large. I don't know whether it's 10% or whatever. So it's a big part of our economy, and we had a debate, and your side lost. Except that run in the next election
The House
and
has
try to
every
stop it.
constitutional right to bring up whatever appropriations bills they want.
And what I'm telling you is that a future House, if you succeed in this, a future House.
Sure, it's fair game. It's fair game.
It's fair game.
Fine.
Okay, that's fine. That's all I wanted you to say. That's what I was trying to get.
Go for it. I mean,
fair enough. It is fair game. I think it's dangerous game because I think what it allows is it allows minorities to take over, and you can't govern that way.
It is not a minority. The leadership is behind this, who is not part of the Tea Party.
The majority of the House does not support this. Okay, it may be a majority of the Republicans who are the majority party of the House, but that's not a majority of the House.
We can't say anyone who's against Obamacare is part of the Tea Party. There is enough people that it has.
No, what I'm telling you is a majority of
the
the House does not support this tactic. No, a majority of the House doesn't support the Affordable Care Act. I accept that. But a majority of the House does not support the tactic of shutting down the government and or threatening
I mean,
default.
nonetheless, we're here now, so what we should talk about is reopening the government and what it's going to take to reopen
Fair enough.
the government.
Let's talk about that because there is a deal on the table, apparently, and the deal goes something like this. They're going to allow the government to reopen till about January, is the latest I've seen. This is the Susan Collins Senator Manchin of West Virginia, their deal, and it's still in flux. Anything could happen. They allow the debt ceiling to rise to about February of next year. The Democrats get this benefit. They get the Republicans actually to enter budget negotiations because the Senate passed a budget 6 months ago that House Republicans have refused to even touch. They're going to enter in that budget negotiations.
Thank you for passing bills in it.
And the Senate Democrats will consider, I believe, the reinsurance tax, which is a pretty obscure tax, and an Affordable Care Act that very few people have to pay. They're going to consider that. That seems to be the outlines of the deal. If that happens, the Senate looks likely to pass it overwhelmingly. Ted Cruz won't support it, but virtually all the 8 Democrats and probably 30, 40 Republicans will pass the bill. It'll get to the House on Wednesday, and the default in the national debt is...
No. They're going to reach the national debt. They're not going to
reach the national debt on Thursday.
They will default on something. It's not going to be the national debt.
If this deal or something similar to it passes the Senate, should the House also pass the bill?
That's up to every member. If I was a member, I wouldn't vote for it.
You would vote against it.
I would never raise the debt limit ever.
You'd never raise the debt limit ever.
For no reason whatsoever.
Okay, so in your view, the debt limit should be reached and we should stop borrowing tomorrow. Or it's maybe Thursday as it happens.
Yes, we should.
Okay. When we stop borrowing, now the Treasury has all these obligations, all these things that we bought and paid for, everything from airplanes to patients on Medicaid to interest on the national debt.
We have 23 different agencies
we can only afford about 70% of the government. Your view, the Treasury should prioritize, even though there's no provision in law for them to do this, and pay what? Interest first? That's the first priority?
They should not default on the debt because that would cause a run on the dollar, which would be a complete international catastrophe.
It certainly would. We agree on that.
That is something we don't want to do.
So interest on the national debt goes first.
But there are plenty of things we don't need to pay.
If the interest on the national debt goes first, then since the Treasury Department is making decisions and they're not doing it based on law because they have to, they run out of money, they've got to make decisions. Treasury Department, the Treasury Secretary is appointed by the President of the United States. He's a Democrat. So I say, you know what? If you have to prioritize after you pay interest on the national debt, we're going to fund all the Democratic priorities. We're not going to fund a single gun license. Sorry. We're not going to fund corporate subsidies. No more corporate welfare. We're not going to give all those pharmaceutical companies all those drug benefits. We're going to help unions. We're going to help teachers. We're going to fund all the government that Democrats like. And because you've unilaterally cut off the spigot, we're going to prioritize only Democratic priorities.
Well, you know what's so interesting?
Screw you, Republicans. You put us in this mess.
Well, you know what's so interesting is that Congress and the administration is forcing our federal employees to prioritize their payments. We have furloughed 800,000 people who were relying on this money, who aren't budgeted for a furlough, and they're having to prioritize payment. They're having to make They're having to make tough decisions.
You know what's even worse?
No, they're having to make tough decisions like, do I pay my credit card or do I pay my mortgage?
You're right.
The government is not going to have to face those type of programs. They're going to have to decide, are we going to give money to this company or that company? They're going to have to decide, do we streamline the way we fund military uniforms? We have 23 different departments that pick uniforms for the military. I mean, there's so much overbloated government fragmentation, overlap, duplication. There's so many areas to make the government efficient that we don't even have to make controversial decisions. The GAO put out a report.
You can't cut 30% of the budget without
saving.
making controversial decisions.
Well, we could go through the non-controversial
Maybe we'll just end a branch of the military.
Why don't
we don't need a Navy and an Air Force and Marines. Just no more Marines.
Well, we don't need 23 3 different agencies picking out uniforms for the military, different departments picking out.
I'm all for streamlining. One of the best things Al Gore did when he was vice president was he helped streamline government. It's always a good thing, and I'm going to support any of your plans to do that.
So why can't we do it?
Government,
why can't we do it?
We're not going to save 30% of the entire national budget.
Even if we only save 1%.
I'm for
even
it.
If it's only, why can't we do it?
I'm for it.
Why can't we do it? Why is the president so against it?
The president's not against it.
Then why aren't we doing it?
Because it's very, I'll tell you why.
Because it's hard. It's hard, but it's hard. It's even more hard for the military families who are having to choose between paying their credit card debt and paying their mortgages. But the government, who gets paid to make these types of decisions, can't do them themselves. I mean, this is completely immoral. That's what I was saying earlier.
Let's talk about
immoral. These deficits are immoral. The decisions we're putting our
deficits
federal employees
are not immoral. Hang on, Perry-Ann. So here's what Congress voted on. They voted that all the people who are furloughed, they're all going to get paid. They get paid every penny back.
Eventually.
Republicans and Democrats are going to pay every penny back.
But these people have
so let's talk about. So here's the thing. So the Republicans shut down the government, and not only did they not save any money, but it's going to cost money.
It is.
The reason it's going to cost money is we're paying every employee exactly the same. We're going to cost an extra, I think it was $19 billion is what it cost last time just to turn the lights out and leave. The work that doesn't get done. We're paying people who aren't doing any work. You should hate a government shutdown because we're paying people who aren't working.
The end of your federal employees, basically a free vacation, right? No.
Right. That's what the Tea Party Republicans forced us to do.
They didn't force anyone to do this. They have put bill after bill forward to reopen the government, and it's the Senate that won't even vote on these bills. They're saying because they won't negotiate, but they're going to force our federal employees to prioritize their payments, but the federal government can't prioritize theirs.
The Tea Party and the House Republicans.
We've already established it's not a Tea Party. It's not a coup in the House that's overthrowing the government.
Every single bill passed by the House. Okay, and all these continuing resolutions, they were considered by the Senate and rejected. The bill,
they were considered.
The one
they
bill,
were turned away. They weren't even looked at.
No, they were voted down. They were voted down. The last one was, I think, it was 54-46. The Senate, though, passed a bill 2 months ago to continue to fund the government. And the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, refuses.
How long did it take them to pass a budget?
Hang on, Perry-Ann.
If we had a budget to begin with, we wouldn't be in this mess to begin with.
They passed a budget 6 months ago. The Speaker of the House, John, because the House won't pass it.
Because the Senate didn't vote on a budget for 4 years.
The House,
the President didn't even introduce. The Senate didn't even introduce a budget.
Why is it that while the Senate will consider
why can't we be on a budget?
Perry-Ann, why is it the Senate will consider all the House bills, but the House refuses to bring up for a vote the Senate bill to open the government and to not default national debt? And the reason they won't consider it
because this debt is immoral. This debt is immoral.
The reason they won't consider it is because they know it will pass. Because they know that the majority of the House supports the majority of the Senate, supports the majority of the American people, and supports the president.
The road to righteousness is very narrow.
Government,
only few see
in opening up the government,
the light of the world. Not
and
enough
ending the national debt.
It's still not
the answer
moral.
Is very simple.
It's still not moral to put this amount of debt
you don't
on
like
my generation
something
and my next generation.
Doesn't mean you get your way. The Constitution says the majority decides.
So if someone tells you to jump off a cliff, you should follow them? That's saying the same thing.
No. The government is chosen by a majority of the American people. All right? They get to decide. Not you, not me. And the House should
the House has decided. The House has decided they're not going to bring up the revenue bill.
The House didn't decide
which they have constitutional authority to do.
The majority of the House supports opening the government. It's only Speaker Boehner supporting a minority in the Tea Party that refused to consider this bill.
He has every right. As Speaker of the House, who elected him was the majority. Only 4 people voted against him. He was elected by the majority to do this.
But he is putting his own personal ambition ahead of his country. And that's an extremely selfish thing to do because he
That is what you get to do when you're the Speaker of the House. Just like when you're the president.
Himself doesn't
every chamber of the government, every branch of government is supposed to be a check on the other one. And we can't, are you going to say President Obama has said more executive
Our time's running up. But I'll tell you this. To me, it's that kind of thought, this kind of failure to compromise, that kind of blow up the government.
Why don't we talk about executive orders that President Obama has passed?
That's why we're in the trouble we're in today. And until the American people elect Democrats
who pass budgets
to Congress,
we won't have these type of debts.
And get rid of these hostage-taking Republicans, we will always have gridlock. So there's a vote in Virginia, and I urge you to support Terry McAuliffe and Ralph Northam and Mark Herring. Please do that. This is Mark Levine. If you enjoyed the show, check it out at marklevinetalk.com. This is Mark Levine. Thank you, Perry. I'm boring.
Thank you.
Signing off.